So welcome everybody to our first event of 2011. Somebody told me 2011 is a really good year. I thought it couldn't be any worse than the other last three. Tonight we have Stephen and Mike Meloan with their new book, The Shroud. I thought that they should have called it by the original title in Yiddish, the Shmata. They didn't take my advice on that. And it's a kind of a mystery, detective, history, what would you say?
Science adventure.
Science adventure. And if you like any or all of those combinations, you will like this too. And Stephen is a local here, and has been around the bookstore for a lot of occasions, and we appreciate that. And so I'm going to just let them tell us all about it, and please welcome them to Reader's Books.
Adjust this a little bit. So yeah, thanks again for coming out, everyone, especially in the rain, and thanks to Andy and Jude for inviting us. So a little bit of background on the book. What we call it is it's an adventure novel that explores the intersection between science and spirituality. And what we mean by an adventure novel as opposed to a traditional sort of thriller, a thriller tends to be almost entirely plot and action driven. You know, it's a roller coaster ride to keep you kind of turning the page to see what's going to happen next. You know, how the hero is going to escape from being pushed out of a helicopter or whatnot, or survive the albino assassin. Whereas this book, you know, an adventure novel like The Shroud, there's action and there's adventure, but it's also very character-driven. It's a journey of discovery, if you will. And basically the story takes place in the near future, where a genetic research team from the NIH has been asked by the Vatican to use the latest findings of the Human Genome Project to explore the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin. And the lead researcher in the story, Robert Strickland, is an agnostic with spiritual leanings, and by that we mean he's a meditator, but he's kind of a seeker of sorts. So beyond that, he's kind of still exploring what he believes about the bigger questions of the world. And as the inquiry proceeds, it appears that this is indeed the burial cloth of the historical Jesus. And then the vestment's bloodstains open up the possibility of cloning, so you can imagine where all that might lead. And the ensuing investigative journey takes them from Washington, D.C. to Israel to Belize, and ultimately has global repercussions and transforms the lives of everyone involved. So Mike's going to start out with the introductory chapter.
Frere Jean was the first to wake. Smelling the smoke, the aged monk sat upright in bed, his hand instinctively clasping the iron key and the gold medallion on a chain around his neck. He threw on his robe and deftly moved toward a thick hemp rope hanging from the tower. After hauling on it once, twice, the heavy bronze bell began to toll. 3 other monks burst into the chamber, eyes wide, with rough wool blankets draped across their shoulders. Without a word, all 4 hurried to a stone and wood chamber already half engulfed in flames. At the room's center, still untouched by the blaze, stood an ornate silver chest on a low stone pedestal. Using their blankets, the other monks beat back the flames enough that Frere Jean could insert the key and opened the chest. He lifted out the contents, an old stained bolt of linen, already singed from the heat. Tucking it beneath his robe, he hobbled out of the burning room toward the monastery's rear entrance where the horses were stabled. From the village came the thunder of hoofbeats and cries of alarm. As the other 3 monks stood around him, illuminated in the moonlight, Jean removed the gold medallion from around his neck. It bore the embossed image of a many-limbed oak tree. He looked into each man's eyes. Then, approaching the youngest, he placed the medallion's chain over his head and took the bolt of cloth from beneath his robe and tucked it into a leather pouch with a shoulder strap. All eyes were on the strong young monk as he slung the pouch over his shoulder and covered it with his tunic. "You are being entrusted with what will one day be recognized as the church's most valuable material possession," the old man rasped, still laboring to catch his breath. "It is the most sacred earthly connection to the Spirit of Jesus Christ. Deliver it to the Abbot of Chambéry. The gold oak will confirm your mission. God be with you. Now, go!" The young monk jumped onto the back of a waiting horse and galloped into the night, just as the invading horde rounded the corner leading to the front of the monastery. The horsemen swarmed inside, throwing silver goblets, figurines, and other artifacts onto blankets and howling into the darkness. As the 3 remaining monks tried to save the monastery, a phalanx of horsemen struck them down with mace and sword. Frere Jean was felled by a single blow from a chain-mailed fist. The camera pulled back to reveal a scene of flaming destruction. Suddenly, the image froze, a ghostly abbey engulfed in flames. Looking exhausted, Dr. Robert Strickland stopped the DVD player, rubbed his eyes, and glanced at the clock on a nearby desk. It was 1:42 a.m. Strickland gathered up the stack of papers strewn across the couch beside him. The top page was printed on fine parchment, with the gold-crossed keys of St. Peter, the symbol of the papacy. Yellow markings highlighted several paragraphs pertaining to ethnogenomic sequencing and a proposed time frame for delivery of the sample. After slipping the pages into an unmarked manila folder and locking it in a filing cabinet, Strickland pressed the DVD's eject button, returned the disc to its case. Dropping it in the desk drawer, he turned out the light and headed upstairs to bed.
So, in the court, where is this up again? In the course of his investigation, in order to establish a more accurate chronology of the Shroud, Strickland travels to the Middle East and then genetically samples a Bedouin tribe from the Negev desert region of Israel. That evening, they wended their way along one of the passages in the encampment to the large tent in the center. Their guide, Habib, led the way with a kerosene lantern that threw flickering shadows on the tent walls as they passed. Everyone they saw nodded respectfully in deference to their position as dining guests of the sheikh. Inside the octagonal tent, the air was scented with cinnamon. Flickering candles lit a low wooden table set with dishes of roasted lamb, rice, kofta, freshly baked bread, and bowls of thick red and green broth. The sheikh's piercing eyes glinted in the dim candlelight. He gestured to Strickland, patting the pillow beside him. Habib sat on Strickland's other side to translate, and Franklin and Nurse Saleh sat across from the 3 men. Habib introduced everyone. "Abdul Bar," said the sheikh, bowing slightly to each of them with his hands on his heart. They replied in kind. "Bob," Strickland said. "Bab," the elder repeated back with relish. Despite the language barrier, Abdul Bar proved to be a charming dinner companion, regaling them with tales of his adventures and conquests in the desert as a young man. "I learned very early that the desert has a soul, a power," he said, his eyes glinting in the golden light. The wise man merges with that power and learns the ways of its strength. The fool does not and is destroyed. Strickland found himself occasionally averting his eyes from the old chieftain as they conversed. His gaze was almost too soul-searching. It was clear why the man had risen to his position of leadership, for he possessed a palpable energy and charisma. Across the table, Franklin and Soleil conversed at length about the role of the World Health Organization and their mutual interests in disease prevention in the developing world. Strickland found himself momentarily pulled in by the discussion. Then the sheikh spoke directly to him, pausing to let Habib translate. "I can often see into men's eyes," he said without a hint of egotism. "I sense that the desert also speaks to you, and that this journey is about more than just your science." Strickland looked back at him without speaking, and the old man placed his hand on his wrist. At once, Strickland felt a palpable warmth enter his body. As he looked into the old man's eyes in the flickering candlelight, he felt suddenly disoriented, though not unpleasantly so, as if time and place had been cut loose from their moorings. "You will find what you seek," the old man announced, "but not here, not yet."
And this passage takes us a little further into the book. After a few hours' sleep, Strickland woke, unable to stop thinking about the Porphyria trigger sequence. He padded out to the courtyard of his condominium building, slipped on a mask and snorkel, and floated face down in the warm waters of the big oval swimming pool. Focusing on slow, even breath, he watched the ghostly, intertwining patterns of light on the pool bottom. The iridescent shapes were impossible to lock onto, constantly in motion, merging and morphing in response to every tiny disturbance on the surface. As he lay still, the water calmed, and the hypnotic beauty and symmetry of the shapes intensified. He had always believed that every aspect of nature held answers, if only we could interpret the data. Everywhere you looked, tantalizing secrets were on display. From the mysterious way birds flocked and moved en masse, to the elegantly programmed social behavior of insects, to the streaming of cytoplasm within a cell. Each reflected fundamental scientific principles, yet the overarching insight sometimes felt just out of reach. There was an intuitive sense that extraordinary treasures lay veiled right before your eyes.